Many of us spend our whole life in search of purpose, desperately seeking meaningful ways to make a difference in the world with the short amount of time we are given. The Deploying High podcast has been designed to help you analyze what gives you purpose.
Welcome, everyone. You are listening and watching Deploying High. I'm your host, Chief Gene Saunders, founder and CEO of Project Lifesaver International. Today, I'd like to welcome our guest, who I think, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely a special guest. I had occasion to talk to him this past November at the UDT SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce. And during that conversation, and actually visiting their store, I had learned that he had written a book. And the book is entitled By Water Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the Navy SEALs. I have read the book. It is probably one of the most complete works on where the SEALs came from, how they evolved. And it not only talks about the SEALs, but it also talks about other special operations groups, their involvement, and how they all kind of interlocked or interacted, which I think it brings a whole new concept to the history of special operations and to the SEALs. So I'd like to welcome my special guest for the day, SEAL Ben Milligan. Ben, how are you?
I'm good, Gene. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm glad to see you. Glad to talk to you. How have things been since November?
Busy. Like the rest of the world, we've been dealing with all of the recurring COVID sicknesses. All my kids keep getting it, and we quarantine the rest of them. And I think now we've all had it. So,
wow.
Fortunately, hopefully, we're getting through this.
Well, I opted for the vaccination, but now that it's that's not even a constant to keep you from getting it. I'm just wondering when my turn will be. So, we'll just truck on and see what happens.
You're in Florida too.
Yeah, I am. So, well, listen, you were in the SEALs, a SEAL. When did you join the SEALs, Ben?
I joined in, so I graduated BUDS in August of 2001, so a month before 9/11.
Wow, what timing.
Yeah.
What timing. So here's a good question for you. And I like to talk to the other SEALs and ask them this question. Why the SEALs?
Back then, even the SEAL teams have a cachet to them that, they've gotten more and more since, since the war on terror has been in full swing. But even before that, I growing up as a young man, I knew that the SEAL teams were the one commando force that went everywhere, that did everything, and I wanted to have an experience like that. So I considered the other branches of service. I mostly considered them because I really didn't like the water. I didn't want to spend so much time in it. I think a lot of guys that ultimately choose that path have a similar story, though. I was talking to a friend of mine that I graduated BUDS with recently, and he was describing a situation where somebody accidentally splashed water on him after BUDS, and he gave them a lot of side eye. The idea of being wet and cold at all after BUDS is about the worst thing you can think of. So,
well, I could well imagine. And although we didn't get to talk in detail, you probably have picked up on the fact that, I have a lot of interest in the SEALs and SEAL teams. My background, just to give you a little insight, was I was in the Army. I was with the 101st Airborne Division long before it became a rope club, which is what we refer to it now. I have been through Ranger School and Marine Recon School, but I did that as a SWAT team member. And then, fortunately, we were able to connect with UDT 21 back in 74, 75.
Oh, interesting.
So I spent a lot of time with UDT 21. Then went to recon school in '83. Met a couple of guys, Hank Wall and Pierre Ponson from Team 2. As a result of that, I was able to link the SWAT team and SEAL Team 2 together. So I spent a lot of time with SEAL Team 2 from about '84 to about '87. I don't know if you ever heard of the great fast rope crash back in Oceana. We were working with SEAL Team 2. In fact, Rudy Bosch was with us on the helo. Anyway, 6 of us and 6 of the guys from Team 2 had a fast rope incident at Oceana Naval Air Station, and we proved that, yeah, fast roping is dangerous. I ended up with a broken back, other assorted injuries with the guys. And then in 1990, met some guys and had a very close working relationship with a dev group up until about '97. So you can see where my interest lies.
Sure.
I was an Army guy, but I'm kind of like you. The SEALs have a whole different way of doing things, in my viewpoint, which I took to very well. And they were a lot easier to work with, I found, as far as getting with them and interacting. So anyway, enough of my story. Why the book, Ben? This is probably one of the most comprehensive works, but it's not just about the SEALs, which I liked.
I appreciate it. I describe it in 2 ways. One, I never say it's a comprehensive history of the SEAL teams. One, because I didn't want to write a comprehensive history of the SEAL teams. I was more interested in really just answering the question that I set out at the beginning of the book, which is, how did the Navy, as I say, it's the least likely branch of service, come to create the country's first permanent land-focused commando unit? I think it's a question that everyone who ever becomes a SEAL is sort of self-conscious about, because we are sent all over the world. We do things. We conduct raids. We were deployed to mountaintops in Afghanistan, and I started to work on the book right in 2011. And in 2011, you had 2 major events. Which one was the killing of Osama bin Laden by Navy SEALs, which was the arch villain in the war on terror, and 2, the 3 months and 4 days later, the crash of Extortion 17, which was the largest loss of life for coalition forces in the entire war in Afghanistan. And both of these events, not only were they predominantly conducted or involving Navy SEALs, but both occurred more than 600 miles away from the closest salt water. So I thought that this was a weird puzzle that nobody had ever really tried to get to the bottom of. So I set out to do it. What I didn't fully anticipate was how it would, like you say, take me into all of these other trying to understand all these other units. And the reason it did is because, as I found, the SEAL story would never have happened had it not been for the experiences of these other units. One, because they tried all the things the SEALs did, but 2, because their parent services got, for one reason or another, oftentimes it was perhaps a bit of conventional thinking, but also just because they had different priorities. They would shut these units down and create this huge gap for another branch of service or another agency to fill. And sometimes it was the Marine Corps that filled it. Sometimes it was the Army that filled it. Sometimes it was the CIA. But invariably, throughout this 30-year arc of history, the Navy continually pushes toward that gap, even when they start running out of water on which to sail to it. So when I describe the book to people, I don't always describe it like that because it's a bit of a long answer, but I'd like to say it's a bit of a biography. Instead of a biography of a character, though, it's a biography of an institution. So, if you ever read Hamilton or, a biography of Washington, any great biography just takes that character and uses them as sort of the central character and as an excuse to talk about all the people that were in their orbit. So for me, yes, the book is about the SEAL teams and how the SEAL teams become what they are, which is the institution that I served in, which is a go anywhere, capture, kill commando force. But it's really just a great excuse to learn about all these other units and how they all contributed to this institution. Sorry, that was a mouthful.
No, but that's good. That's good. And there is a lot of interest in the SEALs, and there has been for the past few years. And a lot of people, just like you mentioned in your book one time, the SEALs, how do they do this and they're so far from the water? Well, they got water in their canteens, so that's close enough. And I've heard that phrase a lot. So.
Yep, that's what they would say.
Yeah, absolutely. But in learning how the SEALs evolved, and because a lot of this I was not aware of, and I think our listeners are not aware of it. Because what do we know about the SEALs? Okay, we know that they are a supposedly amphibian commando unit, but that's not where it ends. Got a lot of books out about the SEALs, a lot of books out about the things that they've done, the accomplishments that they've had, and of course a lot is said about the training, buds. So, since that is one of the highlights that people keep asking about and wanting to know about, what was your impression of buds?
Buds is, I think whether or not you want to be a SEAL, I think a lot of people want to know about buds, like you say, because it is billed as the toughest selection course in the U.S. military. I was a bit suspicious of that claim until I wrote the book. When I'd never served in the Army, I'd never served in the Marine Corps, and I know that these institutions have put together very impressive selection courses for themselves. What I didn't know was, how different buds was from all of these other things. After writing the book, and discovering all of these various selection courses and then follow-on operator training courses, I realized that buds is the hardest thing that we have. But there's a reason that it's as hard as it is. One, it's conducted in a maritime environment because, as you say, SEALs have to be that go anywhere maritime force. So the C is the first letter in the acronym that makes SEAL. So without that, and the C is just a very, very uncomfortable environment to be in. So that's one reason that it's as tough as it is. The other reason that it's as tough is all connected to the origins of where BUD starts. And BUD starts in 1943 when the Allies are trying to figure out how to dismantle this wall that Hitler has erected along the beaches in France and Belgium. And the only way to do that is by creating a force of engineers, naval combat demolition engineers, that can go in and dismantle these things. So the guy that they put in charge of coming up with the training curriculum to do this is a bespectacled sort of a nerd. He's not what you would ever consider like a modern day SEAL or anything like that. He's slight. He's got horrible vision. He doesn't want to be a special operations commando or anything like that. His dream prior to putting all this together is all he wanted to do was be a destroyer sailor just like his old man. But because he had been denied service in the U.S. Navy in the years leading up to World War II, he had bounced around from service to service. He had joined the French Army to be an ambulance driver in the early days of World War II. After he is released from a prison camp by the Germans, he goes to Great Britain. He becomes a bomb disposal guy during the Blitz, and he spends 9 months in Great Britain dismantling bombs where people are getting killed all around him. So when he finally comes back into the U.S. Navy and he's put in charge of this naval commando unit, he's a guy who has seen more of World War II than any American alive. and he knows how difficult combat is, and he knows how hardened these men are going to have to be in order to handle it. Not just the maritime aspect of it, dismantling obstacles in a maritime environment, but also just being able to deal with just the misery of combat, going without food, going without sleep, being miserably cold. So he puts this course together that he has a hard time getting through himself, and then he puts himself through the course. So that's where it comes from. That's why it is what it is, and it's just been piled on ever since.
And that gentleman was?
That was Draper Kaufman.
Yes.
Sorry, I forgot to mention his name.
That's all right. I was going to say it. I said, no, I'm not going to do that.
He's one of the weirdest guys in the book, that's for sure. But he's one of the
he is.
characters.
Well, there's some weird guys in your book, Ben. I mean, face it. And some of the titles that some of the units had, like the tuna fish, I mean, that jumped right out.
I recently got an email from somebody who just read the book. He wanted to say he had no idea that the SEAL teams had been created by a bunch of Jewish jocks.
Well, you never know where something will come from.
Yep.
How many things have been created sitting over a beer or, over a dinner or, if you look back at history. And some of the other interesting things was a lot of people talk about, Fort Pierce is where it all started and so forth and so on, but that's not entirely correct. And I had heard that in the past. It all started, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Little Creek, Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you start the story, but yeah, there's the Scouts and Raiders they cut their teeth in Little Creek. And Little Creek at that time it's a backwater inlet, just at the very lower lip to the entrance of the Chesapeake Bay. If you want to even go back further, they started in Solomon's Island, which is a bit north of Maryland. But what's interesting about Fort Pierce is that all of these units eventually migrate down there. And everybody, all of the units that are created, whether they're naval combat demolition units, the Army, Navy Scouts and Raiders, the UDTs, and the Army Rangers, they all spend time at Fort Pierce getting maritime training. So if there is a birthplace of all of these institutions, I suppose for Fort Pierce is as good as any.
Yeah, for argument's sake, of course.
For argument's sake. Right.
Well, and of course,
it's a good place for a museum too. It's a nice place to come to.
Well, it is. I mean, let's face it, Little Creek doesn't always have the most hospitable weather. Having been from that area in Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, I can tell you, it's sometimes it can be very cross when it comes to weather and support. And a lot of people don't know that Buzz was at Little Creek for a while. In fact, they had, correct me if I'm wrong, they had two Buds.
They did.
One in California and one in Little Creek.
At the time, it was called UDTR, Underwater Demolition Training course, or what was the R? I can't remember, but it was the UDTR course. So yes, they did. Yeah. I can't remember how many classes they got up to. They got into the 30s before they consolidated out in San Diego. So, but there's always stories from those early East Coast classes about being tortured in the Chesapeake or the Atlantic. Wow. And if when they were surf tortured in the Chesapeake, there was always one class that would have to break the ice to get in the water.
Believable. In fact, a very, very good friend of mine, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's where he went through UDT training. So, and another interesting thing I saw in the book, which I never knew about, and I keep saying this because I think people that have an interest in special operations itself should read this book, not just in SEALs, but just in special operations, was the activities of the early SEALs, if you want to call them that, in China, with a fellow by the name of Miles.
Yeah,
I thought that was very interesting. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the whole China segment was I knew about the I knew that before I had started writing this book, I had structured the book in, when I got the contract with the publisher, I had structured it into 10 chapters. And I wanted to stay as close to that outline as I possibly could. By the time I had finished chapter 5, which was my chapter on the UDTs, I knew that I wanted to leave World War II and go into the Korean War. And I needed to start talking about all the Navy units, all the UDT units that start moving inland in the Korean Peninsula to do all of these things like blowing rail bridges, escorting indigenous agents ashore. And I kept trying to like talk about this China experience the Navy had in World War II as almost like an introductory section to my Korea chapter. And so I kept, trying to write it. I kept trying to like, cram as much, information into this introductory section. And my introductory section kept growing and growing and growing. Before long, I was like, I'm going to have to write a whole chapter on this thing. And it was going to totally sabotage my timeline for finishing the book, but I knew I had to do it. So what I ended up doing is I spent the next year to 18 months just living mentally in China, learning everything I could about this, multiple trips to the archive in Maryland, which has a completely untapped, almost untapped, box after box after box of information on this one subject that very few people have actually tapped into to write a comprehensive history of this experience, the Navy's experience in China. So what that was in the early days of World War II, Admiral King, who's the chief of naval operations, he knows how important China could be in dismantling or in winning total victory against the Japanese. I'm not sure if China is important because they want to establish a beachhead there and then ultimately move troops from China to Japan, or if it's just important because they need weather stations set up in China so they can predict the weather that's going to be blowing out of the Siberian tundra all the way out into the Pacific. And without those weather stations, the ships were flying blind. So he dispatches this guy, Mary Miles, who's a destroyer skipper or a destroyer sailor who wants nothing more than to go to sea in World War II and fight, the way he's been training his entire career to fight. But he dispatches him to China to set up weather stations and what he describes as to heckle the Japanese, a very, very broad, vague mandate. So Miles gets over there. And for whatever reason, Miles's personality is almost perfectly adapted for diplomacy and making friends with the Chinese. And nobody at that point had really been able to do that. The OSS had trouble. Donovan's personality wasn't, it was like oil and water with the Chinese. So every time an American went over there to try and establish some sort of relationship with the Chinese army, or Stilwell, Donovan, whatever, they would have trouble. But Miles, he hits the ground in China, establishes great relationships, and before long, the Chinese ask him if he'd be interested in commanding commanding a Chinese guerrilla army. He's a sailor, but he accepts without even asking permission. He accepts, and before long, he's commanding this 100,000-man Navy-led guerrilla army in China, which sort of creates a pipeline for all of these special units that the Navy has been creating since the beginning of the war. But by the end of the war, they don't really know what to do with them. So they give them to Miles, send them to China. So
Interesting.
It's a fascinating period. Like when I talk to people now, there are a lot of things that folks don't realize that happened during this period. But one of the chapters that I'm always asked about is this China chapter, because it's nobody thinks about it, nobody talks about it. It's a totally lost pocket of World War II history.
And I can see that because until I read the book, I didn't know any of that, which gave me a whole new understanding. There's one theme or two themes actually that I have picked up on in this book that I'd like you to comment on. One is, and you commented on it just a minute ago, is a lot of the guys that actually brought special ops into existence were not special ops people, had no idea what special ops was, and really didn't care to be in special ops. What is your feeling on that? I mean, I know that a lot of us now, we like that. We like doing it.
Yeah.
We have a penchant for it, but here these guys were. And, another one was Darby. I mean, he was an administrative officer and he got tapped. Okay, now go start the Rangers. But what they did and how they did it was phenomenal with no background in it. And you highlighted that in your book in several occasions.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things that I discovered when writing the book. Was, we had this myth. All these special operations units have this myth that that there's this huge distinction between unconventional troops and conventional troops, or conventional thinkers and unconventional thinkers. And I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think the reason that myth persists is because any of us unconventional types, at some point in our careers, we've come in contact with that conventional thinker, whoever that regular Navy person is or regular Army guy is, and they've given us a hard time. And so it reinforces that idea. But the fact of the matter is all of these units were created by very conventional people. Like you mentioned Darby. Darby is probably the most revered person in Army Ranger history, and certainly one of the most revered people in the history of Army Special Operations, and for good reason. He's incredible. What he does in a few short months in one, creating the Ranger Force and then leading it, he's an amazing person. What we don't realize is that by the end of the war, Darby, he turns his back on the whole Ranger concept. He thinks that any unit should be able to perform, any infantry unit should be able to perform Ranger operations. But like you talk about Miles, Kaufman, some of these other conventional types, they have no interest in creating special commando type units. They see an opportunity and they solve a problem. They weren't setting out like entrepreneurs to create a unit that's going to ultimately kill Osama bin Laden. They were seeing this problem that was directly in front of them, and they were doing their best to just solve it. And the person who's probably most conventional of all of these folks, and the person who's also most responsible for creating the SEAL teams, is the most conventional sailor in history, which is Arleigh Burke. He's not an aviator. He's not a submariner. He's not a former UDT guy. But what he is he's 100% focused on keeping the Navy connected to an offensive role in the future of the U.S. military's defense strategy. And if you have that preoccupation, if your preoccupation is to keep looking at the enemy, keep focused on the enemy, then you're naturally going to come up with all sorts of interesting sorts of units, like the SEALs or the Rangers, the Delta Force, or whatever. Anyway, yeah, there's a and that was finding all of these conventional folks in that have contributed to this history was it was really interesting for me, because one, it dispels that myth that unconventional troops created themselves. Like before I set out to write this book, the most pervasive myth about the creation of the SEAL teams was that we sort of created ourselves. That the UDTs have been created in World War II. During Korea, they start to move inland, And by the early 60s, when Kennedy comes to office, there are enough of these Korea-era UDTs that convince Kennedy to create the SEAL teams. It's nonsense. None of that happened. I mean, there were, yes, UDTs that were going ashore. Yes, there were UDTs that were, stretching the boundaries of naval warfare. But the person that creates the SEAL teams, like I said, it's Arleigh Burke. He's the most conventional sailor in history. So,
and the other thing that I have noticed from experience, and I'm sure you have, and it kind of comes out in the book, is how hard charging the unconventional thinkers are, like Donovan, Beckwith, and how sometimes there's a clash. And this really comes to bear. I've seen it in the military. I've seen it in police work. How the conventional thinkers and say SWAT, how there is a clash of mindsets. And then when you look at the history of the military and special operations, the units were created, and somewhere in there, they did their job. And when they couldn't find anything else to do, what the conventional leaders did with them, which I think was a fatal blow to some of them, because they put them into conventional roles, and that's not what they were designed for. I think the Army recognized that Ranger training or Rangers had value when they created Ranger School. But if you look at Ranger School, what is it? It's a leadership school. Well, that's good. That's good because you're taking those Ranger concepts, but they're basically infantry concepts, and you're teaching guys, how to bring them into operation. But I go back to what I was saying, and if I've kind of veered off a little bit, I apologize, but it's just the way that special ops came into being and how they were treated. And what happened to them? Well, for instance, the Rangers after Cisterna. And then at the end of World War II, what the military did with all of these units that they had trained to such a fine edge, and what they did with them. So what do you think about that?
I mean, you have to take some of this experience and place it in context, because the U.S. military prior to World War II it's a shell for a larger army. It's the United States never wanted to have a professional force. We didn't need a professional force. We had mostly docile neighbors, to our north and south. We had, compared to, the great powers of Europe and Asia, we didn't have an expeditionary or a colonial ambition. So the expectation is that we are, after a major conflict, we're going to downsize. And when you downsize, you disestablish units. And that was the experience of the U.S. military after the First World War. And for a lot of folks, particularly policymakers, that was the expectation after the Second World War. It's not until the 1950s or the 1949 when the Soviets detonate their own atomic bomb, we realized that this Cold War is back on. All these interesting units that we need to reform them. But I never wanted to come down too hard on the quote unquote conventional thinkers for disestablishing these units, or they were take somebody like John McGee in the Korea chapter. He is as conventional as it comes. He has no interest in special operations, but he is one of the architects of all of the Army's special operations and guerrilla units in the Korean War. And in his mind, he has this concept almost for a SOCOM like unit, 20 years, 30 years before it actually comes into existence. But these units, when they are disestablished, they're disestablished by guys like George Marshall, Matthew Ridgway, Mark Clark. I mean, it's hard to look at these guys and, say that these weren't, courageous, thoughtful, enterprising people. They were. They had different priorities, though. Their priorities were they were institutional. They were focused on the entire organization, and they couldn't necessarily. They didn't have the imagination yet to be able to see the potential that these units could provide to the military as a whole. And lack of imagination, that is not a peculiar trait to just conventional forces. There's a lack of imagination in folks that we consider unconventional forces too. A lot of people just, it takes a second, it takes, decades, generations before you can mentally break through and see the potential that's been laying at your feet this entire time. So I'm reluctant to come down hard on, a lot of these folks, especially somebody like a Marshall or something like that. I mean, Marshall creates the Rangers. Without him, they wouldn't have been created in World War II, but he also kills them. So
yes, he did. And, and I think if I remember correctly, in the Rangers, Truscott had a lot to do with it, with the Rangers' creation and their use.
Yeah.
But I think what it highlights is that during conflict, these units have contributed greatly, especially to situations that couldn't have been handled by quote unquote conventional units. And I think we paid for it dearly when in the Iranian hostage situation, not having these units, although we had some, they were somewhat ad hoc. And they certainly didn't have any kind of coordination between them. And that came out tremendously in the tragedy on the rescue mission. So, but moving ahead, basically what I saw in the book, and this is my own interpretation, is with all the SEALs history and all the special ops training, the SEALs really came to the forefront and came into their own in Vietnam. And you've got an interesting chapter in there about where a good friend of mine has mentioned, and that's Ron Yaw, and what they did and some of the exploits of the SEALs in Vietnam. And I tend to feel that, that's correct, and that's my own personal view, that's when they really came into their own. And they really proved the value of the SEAL teams and the fact that even though they operated around the rivers and the deltas, that's water, that's close. The things that they did. So what is your feeling on that? Am I in the right ballpark or? Yeah,
you are. I mean, the SEALs, the SEALs that are created in 1962 aren't the SEALs that we have today. The SEALs in 1962, and we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the establishment of SEAL Teams 1 and 2. They're created as coastal raiders, essentially. The end of the story is, it's already tucked into the name, sea, air, and land. It's already implied that these are going to be a go anywhere force. But in action, in intent and purpose, they are created as a coastal raiding force. They are an extension of the fleet. They're the Navy's commandos, and there's never a concept put forth in the original founding documents. These are going to be go anywhere, capture, kill commandos. There's not even there's nothing in those original documents to say that they're going to be a capture kill force, or their objective is going to be the kidnapping of hostages. That's actually a phrase that comes in much later. So it takes about 5 years for the SEALs to transform themselves from coastal raiders into what they become in Vietnam. And you're absolutely right. It happens there. And it happens because the war isn't the war that the SEALs expect. In the first unit of SEALs that is sent over, they get there and they look around and they don't see any of the things that they've trained for, and they're not sure what to do. So when you talk about, conventional or unconventional thinking, these are the most unconventional folks in the U.S. Navy. They get to Vietnam and they can't think, they don't have the imagination to understand what opportunity is right at their feet. So what do? They kind of close up shop. The commanding officer, he says, this isn't the war we trained for. We're going to stay on base until the next unit gets here, and we're going to tell them to do the same thing. Well, the regular chain of command, the conventional chain of command, sees what the SEALs are doing, and they're ready to send them home. They're ready to kick them out of the country. If they're not going to go after the enemy, we don't want them. Well, the next group that comes in, they replace that unit. They come in and they just, whether this is the war they trained for or not, the commanding officer, Maynard Wires, he says, this is the only war in town. We're going to figure this out. So he essentially starts sending his guys out every night, and he's going with them, and they figure out, whether it's an uncomfortable war. All they're doing is patrol and ambush. 99% of the operations that they go on, they're not encountering the enemy. But they're getting acclimated to the environment. And within 2 years, they start to figure out that there is more to do here than just go and sit on a riverbank all night and wait for a sampan to violate curfew so we can shoot them up and take whatever's in the sampan. They realize that they can kidnap people, they can ransack them for information, and they can find the next person up the chain of command that they can go kidnap and then get more information from that person. So they do. They transform from this coastal raiding force, this patrol and ambush force, all the way to this thing that has never, it's a completely new concept of special operator in Vietnam, and that's the Capture Kill Commando Force.
Like I said, it's a fascinating book. So what's next for Ben Milligan?
I don't know. I've got a couple of ideas that I'm sort of outlining right now. I've had to do a few speeches. I find that speeches and article writing takes a lot longer than I ever anticipated that it would. Just trying to get out and promote the book. The one thing that your listeners can do is they could follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at bmilligan3 or on Twitter at Ben H. Milligan. And just, if they read the book, please leave a review. That's helpful. Look for something new, but I'm a notoriously slow writer. I'm a slow reader, slow writer, slow researcher. So it's not going to happen for at least another 5 years.
For those that are interested, Ben, where can they get the book?
The easiest place to get it right now is probably on Amazon. It's hit or miss when you go into a Barnes & Noble. The book hasn't quite been out long enough to have gained a ton of traction, but it'd be helpful if you do want the book. Any place you can get it, retail. I always recommend independent bookstores. Independent booksellers are the number one place to get it. Do your part to support your local bookseller. If they want a signed copy, there's a store near me that I sign copies through at Prairie Path Books in the Chicago area. But Barnes & Noble, Amazon, independent bookstores, that's probably the best spot. And you can find me on social media too. So.
Well, I guess I might have to get in touch with Prairie Path Books so I can get a signed copy. One place I know you can get it if you're around our area, Fort Pierce or Port St. Lucie, is a UDT SEAL Museum, has it in their merchandise store. We've been talking to Ben Milligan, retired Navy SEAL, who is the author of By Water Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the Navy SEALs. It's a fascinating book, and anyone that's interested in special operations throughout the years and the rise of the SEALs and where they are today, you should go out and get a copy, as Ben said. And just one last question, Ben, if you don't mind, what is your opinion? What is the future of the SEALs?
I think it's bright. I think that the one immutable fact about the SEAL teams is that they are willing to confront issues that they're dealing with and adapt to overcome them. So yeah, there's been some problems that I think that they're dealing with now, but I know for a fact that they are dealing with them. And I don't see any change in the trajectory of where the SEAL teams as an institution are heading. As long as the SEAL teams maintain that focus on that focus on the enemy, whatever enemy that policymakers determine that to be, and being as useful as possible in advocating advocating for American interests. I think they'll be as successful as they ever have been.
And I think you're right. Absolutely. I want to thank you, Ben, for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been fascinating. As I said before, not to overstate it, the book is fascinating. It brings into focus a lot of situations as to why did things evolve the way they did, and who were the principal motivators behind it. So thank you. I do appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Great having me on. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you, sir. You have been listening to Deploying High. I am your host, Chief Gene Saunders, the founder and CEO of Project Lifesaver International. And if you'd like to get the book that our namesake is, Deploying High, you can go to our website, Project Lifesaver International, and go to our merchandise store and obtain a copy there. I'd like to thank you and have a great one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deploying High podcast with Chief Gene Saunders, brought to you by Project Lifesaver International. Deploying High would like to thank all of our supporters across the country and around the world. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe to our channel, make a donation, and don't forget to tell a friend about us. All proceeds from the Deploying High podcast go to support Project Lifesaver International, online at projectlifesaver.org, the original 501c3 nonprofit organization.